On contradictions, I think throughout my life I've thought that we should try and attain a situation where we had ironed out the contradictions in our life. That is to say, we should have moral certainties. Things should be black and white. There should be no internal striving or tension. So we should live an easy life where, for example, we ate what we wanted to eat without any counter arguments or feelings that maybe we shouldn't be eating this. So our morality, our political thought, for example, that we should vote for a particular party and not worry that maybe some of the policies of the other party were better, in fact, and there was a contradiction. Or we should live in a world where the arguments put forward by people who are trying to persuade us didn't contain lots of logical and other contradictions. All that was my hope and dream. What I've learnt in my life increasingly, and this was something to do with becoming an adult, was that life is filled with contradictions. It's summarized beautifully for me in the poem of Alexander Pope in his essay on man, Know then thyself, presume not God to scan, which ends up with the glory, jest, and riddle of the world. It's a riddle because we are, as he says in the passage between, we are created half to rise and half to fall, great Lord of all things, yet a prey to all. We are filled with contradictions about whether we are a god or a beast, whether we should do this, whether we should do that. And this is something which is a special feature, I think, of the modern world which I grew up in. One thing that can be said about the tribal worlds of early man, and to a certain extent some of the great peasant societies, is they had many defects, but they were not filled with these existential contradictions and uncertainties that seem to face all of us all the time. We are taught on the one hand, on the other, all the time. The great exponent of the world of contradictions, I suppose, is Shakespeare. His plays are filled with those sorts of contradictions. The famous speech by Hamlet, to be or not to be, aye, there's the question, etc. That's filled with contradictions, whether it is better, and so on. And many of his plays revolve around existential contradictions in our lives, what we should do, what our morality should be. And it is the consequence of an open and divided world where our head and our heart, our political and economic incentives are often head to head, neither as supreme, and both have their arguments for them. And so much of my life as a teaching academic and as a person has been trying to navigate my way, as it were, between extremes of contradictions. And two things I suppose I've learnt. One is that we have to live with contradictions. It's not our fault and it's not unusual. It's in the system. And if we feel these contradictions, there is no way of ironing them out unless you become an extreme fundamentalist who reduces everything to one simple message, which is not something that attracts me. So contradictions are something we have to live with and accept. And the second thing is that usually there is some compromise, some way of finding that blessed middle ground, the golden mean between contradictions. So you are pulled in several directions, but very often, if you think about what they are, estimate them, you will find that there is a narrow way in which you can absorb perhaps the best of the two polarized things. So you can satisfy part of your head and part of your heart, for instance, or eat a diet which is reasonable, not too immoral, but maybe not over the top. So living with contradictions, the first thing is to realize that they are there, that until we die, there will never be a peace from the warring contradictions in our lives. But maybe they have their benefits, and certainly much of the energy, rather like fission energy in nuclear power, is through the clashing of contradictions, which then leads you to a new outcome. So the contradictions which, for example, Marx pointed out in Capitalism, which he thought led to its downfall, the contradictions of earlier social formations which were resolved in a new situation. That idea that the dialectic, the thesis clashing with the antithesis, leading to a new synthesis, that is something built into all of our lives, and not to be feared or leading us to too much anxiety. It is there. The best thing I find, if they're really bad, is to write them on a piece of paper and then to decide what to do.